Elizabeth Anne Holmes is an American former biotechnology entrepreneur convicted of criminal fraud. In 2003, Holmes founded and was the chief executive officer of Theranos, a now-defunct health technology company that soared in valuation after the company claimed to have revolutionized blood testing by developing methods that could use surprisingly small volumes of blood, such as from a finger prick. By 2015, Forbes had named Holmes the youngest and wealthiest self-made female billionaire in America on the basis of a $9 billion valuation of her company. In the following year, as revelations of potential fraud about Theranos' claims began to surface, Forbes revised its estimate of Holmes' net worth to zero, and Fortune named her in its feature article on the world's 19 most disappointing leaders. The decline of Theranos began in 2015. When a series of journalistic and regulatory investigations revealed doubts about the company's technology claims and whether Holmes had misled investors and the government. In 2018, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission charged Theranos and Holmes with deceiving investors by massive fraud through false or exaggerated claims about the accuracy of the company's blood testing technology. Holmes settled the charges by paying a $500,000 fine, returning 18.9 million shares to the company, relinquishing her voting control of Theranos, and accepting a 10-year ban from serving as an officer or director of a public company. In June 2018, a federal grand jury indicted Holmes and former Theranos chief operating officer Ramesh Sunny Balwani on 9 counts of wire fraud and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, with the victims being investors and patients. Her trial in the case of U.S. v. Holmes, et.al. ended in January 2022 when Holmes was convicted of defrauding investors, and found not guilty of defrauding patients. She faces up to 20 years in federal prison, plus potentially millions in restitution and fines, and is scheduled to be sentenced in November 2022. The credibility of Theranos was attributed in part to Holmes's personal connections and ability to recruit the support of influential people, including Henry Kissinger, George Shultz, Jim Mattis, and Betsy DeVos, all of whom had served or would go on to serve as U.S. presidential cabinet officials. Holmes was in a clandestine romantic relationship with Balwani during most of Theranos' history. Following the collapse of Theranos, she started dating hotelier Billy Evans, with whom she had a son in 2021. Holmes's career, the rise and dissolution of her company, and the subsequent fallout are the subject of a book, Bad Blood: Secrets and Lies in a Silicon Valley Startup, by the Wall Street Journal reporter John Carrero, an HBO documentary feature film, The Inventor, Out for Blood in Silicon Valley, and a Hulu miniseries called The Dropout. History. While at Stanford University, Elizabeth Holmes had an idea to develop a wearable patch that could adjust the dosage of drug delivery and notify doctors of variables in patients' blood. She started developing lab-on-a-chip technology for blood tests, with the idea to start a company that would make blood tests cheaper, more convenient, and accessible to consumers. Holmes dropped out of Stanford in 2003 and used the education trust from her parents to found the company that would later be called Theranos, derived from a combination of the words therapy and diagnosis. The company's original name was Real-Time Cures, which Holmes changed after deciding that too many people were skeptical of the word cure. Partnerships. In 2012, Safeway invested $350 million into retrofitting 800 locations with clinics that would offer in-store blood tests. After many missed deadlines and questionable results from a trial clinic at Safeway's corporate offices, the deal was terminated in 2015. In 2013, Theranos partnered with Walgreens to offer in-store blood tests at more than 40 locations. Although Theranos blood tests were reportedly used on drug trial patients for GlaxoSmithKline and Pfizer, both companies stated that there were no active projects with Theranos in October 2015. In June 2016, Walgreens terminated its partnership with Theranos. In November 2016 it filed suit against Theranos in federal court in Delaware for breach of contract. In June 2017, Theranos reported to investors that the suit, which originally sought $140 million in damages, was settled for less than $30 million. In March 2015, the Cleveland Clinic announced a partnership with Theranos to test its technology and decrease the cost of lab tests. In July 2015, Theranos became the lab work provider for Pennsylvania insurers AmeriHealth Caritas and Capital Blue Cross. In July 2015, the Food and Drug Administration approved the use of the company's fingerstick blood testing device for the herpes simplex virus outside a clinical laboratory setting. Theranos was named the 2015 Bioscience Company of the Year by the Arizona Bioindustry Association. Exposure and downfall. In February 2015, Stanford professor John Ioannidis wrote in the Journal of the American Medical Association that no peer-reviewed research from Theranos had been published in medical research literature. In May 2015, University of Toronto professor Eleftherios Diamandis analyzed Theranos technology and concluded that most of the company's claims are exaggerated. Attempting to boost the company's credibility, Holmes invited then U.S. Vice President Joe Biden to tour their facility. Biden praised what he saw, but to conceal the lab's true operating conditions, Holmes and Balwani had created a fake lab for the vice president's tour. In October 2015, John Carreiro of the Wall Street Journal reported that Theranos was using traditional blood testing machines instead of the company's Edison devices to run its tests, and that the company's Edison machines might provide inaccurate results. Tyler Schultz, a Theranos employee from 2013 to 2014 and the grandson of then Theranos director, former U.S. Secretary of State George P. Shultz, was a key source for the WSJ story. Schultz had attempted to bring his concerns to company management. When that failed, he had spoken to Carreiro and also, under an alias, reported the company to the New York State Department of Health. Theranos claimed that the allegations were factually and scientifically erroneous. Walgreens suspended plans to expand blood testing centers in their stores following the report. At that time, the Cleveland Clinic announced that it would work to verify Theranos technology. Theranos fought back against the journal's investigation, sending lawyers after sources in the story, including Schultz, in an effort to stop them from providing information to the press. Former employees of reputation management firm Status Labs said that Theranos had hired the firm to discreetly erase mentions of the WSJ's reporting from its Wikipedia article, despite the activity being a violation of the website's terms of use. Following the WSJ story, the history of FDA interactions with Theranos was scrutinized. The FDA had received a formal inquiry to look at Theranos blood test devices by the U.S. Department of Defense in 2012, before the devices were commercially available and did not require FDA approval. FDA inspection reports from 2014 and 2015 stated that its containers for blood collection were not validated under actual or simulated use conditions and were not reviewed and not approved by designated individual prior to issuance. In 2015, an FDA inspection resulted in multiple observed violations of FDA Title 21 regulations. It was eventually revealed that the FDA had classified Theranos's device, called a nanotainer, as a Class II medical device, meaning that Theranos would need to use special labels, meet certain performance standards and perform post-market surveillance of the device. Theranos asserted that the nanotainer was a Class I medical device and therefore not subject to any regulatory requirements. After the 2015 inspection, Theranos announced that it would voluntarily suspend its tests apart from the FDA-approved herpes simplex virus test. The Arizona Department of Health Services reported issues with the company's Scottsdale lab meeting regulations in September 2015. The reports were revealed in the Arizona Republic in November 2015. In January 2016, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services sent a letter to Theranos based on an inspection of its Newark, California lab in 2015, reporting that the facility caused immediate jeopardy to patient health and safety due to a test to determine the correct dose of the blood-thinning drug warfarin. Walgreens subsequently announced a suspension of their Theranos blood tests from the Newark lab and immediately paused wellness services in Palo Alto. Theranos also agreed to stop tests at Capital Blue Cross's Enola, Pennsylvania retail store. In March 2016, CMS regulators announced plans to enact sanctions that included suspending Holmes and Balwani from owning or operating any certified clinical laboratory for 2 years and that they would revoke the facility's certification as a clinical laboratory. By April 2016, Theranos came under criminal investigation by federal prosecutors and the SEC for allegedly misleading investors and government officials about its technology. The U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Energy and Commerce requested information on what Theranos was doing to correct its testing inaccuracies and adherence to federal guidelines in June 2016. In May 2016, Theranos announced that it had voided 2 years of results from its Edison device. The company announced that about 1% of test results had been voided or corrected from its proprietary machines in June 2016. Within 2 weeks, Walgreens formally terminated its partnership with Theranos and would close all remaining Theranos wellness centers. In July 2016, Theranos announced that the CMS had revoked its Clinical Laboratory Improvement Amendments certificate and issued sanctions prohibiting its owners and operators from owning or operating a clinical laboratory for 2 years, suspension of approval to receive Medicare and Medicaid payments, and a civil monetary penalty. The company discontinued testing at its Newark location while attempting to resolve the issues. Theranos announced plans to appeal the decision by regulators to revoke its license to operate a lab in California and other sanctions. In August 2016, the company withdrew its request for emergency clearance of a Zika virus blood test after a lack of essential safeguards during the testing process was found by federal inspectors. Theranos announced that it would close its laboratory operations and wellness centers and lay off about 40% of its workforce to work on miniature medical testing machines in October 2016. In January 2017, Theranos announced that it had laid off a further 41% of its workforce, or approximately 155 people, and closed the last remaining blood testing facility after the lab failed a second major U.S. regulatory inspection. Also that month, the company faced lawsuits from several different entities including Walgreens and Arizona Attorney General Mark Brnovic. In April 2017, lawyers for Partner Investments LP and 2 other funds, with combined stakes totaling more than $96 million in Theranos preferred shares, charged that Theranos had threatened to seek bankruptcy protection if the investors did not agree to accept additional stock equity in lieu of litigation. Theranos officials said the funds had mischaracterized the exchange offer, which was discussed before the suit was filed. The suit also alleged that Theranos had misled company directors about its practices concerning laboratory testing and that it had secretly bought lab equipment to run fake demonstrations. On May 1, 2017, Theranos announced that it had reached an undisclosed settlement with Partner Fund Management LP. Theranos's general counsel, David Taylor, stated, "Theranos is pleased to have resolved both lawsuits with PFM. Although we are confident that we would have prevailed at trial, resolution of these 2 cases allows our tender offer to go forward and enables us to return our focus where it belongs, which is on executing our business plans and delivering value for our shareholders." In April 2017, Theranos reached a settlement with CMS agreeing to stay out of the blood testing business for at least 2 years in exchange for reduced penalties, and signed a consent decree with Arizona Attorney General Mark Brnovic over violations of the Arizona Consumer Fraud Act. Alleged violations included false advertisement and inaccurate blood testing. Theranos agreed to refund $4.65 million to the state's residents for Theranos blood testing services, providing a refund to every resident who had received a test, regardless of whether the test results were voided or corrected. In August 2017, Theranos announced it had reached a settlement with Walgreens. In December 2017, Fortress Investment Group, a wholly owned company of SoftBank Group, loaned $100 million to Theranos for 4% of the company. Theranos had reportedly been on the verge of bankruptcy, with the loan meant to keep the company solvent into 2018. The loan was secured by Theranos's patents. On April 10, 2018, the company laid off the majority of workers in a renewed bid to avoid bankruptcy. The company's total headcount was fewer than 25 employees, after having 800 employees at its peak. SoftBank's Fortress bought up Theranos patents and later, taking advantage of the new market conditions in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, set up a shell company called Labrador Diagnostics, which sued one of the companies making COVID-19 tests, saying that its test violated those Theranos patents. Theranos was still being issued patents into 2019 due to the lengthy patent application process. Civil and criminal proceedings. In March 2018, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission filed civil fraud charges against Theranos, its CEO Elizabeth Holmes and former President Ramesh Sunny Balwani, claiming they had engaged in an elaborate, years-long fraud wherein they deceived investors into believing that its key product, a portable blood analyzer, could conduct comprehensive blood tests from finger drops of blood. Holmes reached a settlement with the SEC which required her to pay $500,000, forfeit 19 million shares of company stock, and be barred from having a leadership position in any public company for 10 years. Balwani did not settle with the SEC. On June 15, 2018, Holmes and Balwani were indicted on multiple counts of wire fraud and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. According to the indictment, investors, doctors, and patients were defrauded. It is alleged the defendants were aware of the unreliability and inaccuracy of their products, but concealed that information. If convicted, they each face a maximum fine of $250,000 and 20 years in prison. The case, United States v. Elizabeth A. Holmes, ETAL, has been assigned to Lucy H. Koh, United States District Judge of the United States District Court for the Northern District of California. The jury selection for the trial was to begin on July 28, 2020, and the trial was to have commenced in August 2020. However, the COVID-19 pandemic led to a proposed October date, before the trial for Holmes was rescheduled to begin on August 31, 2021, with Balwani's trial pushed back further to 2022. In February 2021, federal prosecutors accused Holmes and other executives of destroying evidence in Theranos's final days in business. The specific evidence in question is the history of internal testing, including accuracy and failure rates of Theranos's blood testing systems. On January 3, 2022, Holmes was found guilty of 3 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Balwani's trial began in March 2022, and he was convicted of 12 counts of fraud in July 2022. Shutdown. On September 4, 2018, Theranos announced in an email to investors that it would cease operations and release its assets and remaining cash to creditors after all efforts to find a buyer were fruitless. Most of the company's remaining employees had been laid off on the previous Friday, August 31. However, Theranos General Counsel and new CEO David Taylor and a few support staffers remained on payroll for a few more days. Any equity investments in the company were made worthless by the shutdown. Technology and products. Theranos claimed to have developed devices to automate and miniaturize blood tests using microscopic blood volumes. Theranos dubbed its blood collection vessel the nanotainer and its analysis machine the Edison. Holmes reportedly named the device Edison after inventor Thomas Edison, stating, "We tried everything else and it failed, so let's call it the Edison." This was likely because of a well-known Edison quote, "I've not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." The blood sample was to be collected via a finger prick and then transferred to the nanotainer through Theranos' sample collection device. At just 12.9 mm in height, the nanotainer held a couple of drops of blood. One of the patents for the Edison described a point-of-care system that could communicate with the Internet to receive instructions for which blood tests to run on the samples, before communicating these results back through the Internet. The results would then be compared to medical data available on the Internet, with the Edison running supplementary blood tests that were more targeted based on the results of the comparison. The patent was unclear on how much blood the Edison would actually require to conduct these blood tests. In one section, the patent claimed the sample needed to consist of about 10 drops of blood, but in another section, the patent claimed the Edison would need less than 1 drop of blood. The technology was criticized for not being peer-reviewed. Theranos claimed to have data verifying the accuracy and reliability of its tests that would be published. In February 2016, Theranos announced that it would permit the Cleveland Clinic to complete a validation study of its technology. In March 2016, a study authored by 13 scientists appeared in the Journal of Clinical Investigation, where it was stated that the company's blood test results were flagged outside their normal range 1.6 times more often than other testing services, that 68% of lab measurements evaluated showed significant inter-service variability, and that lipid panel test results between Theranos and other clinical services were non-equivalent. In August 2016, the company introduced a new robotic capillary blood testing unit named MiniLab at the 2016 annual meeting of the American Association for Clinical Chemistry, but did not present any data supporting the claimed abilities of the device. The MiniLab was allegedly capable of carrying out a range of tests from a small amount of blood. After failing to address concerns that Theranos exaggerated the capabilities of the MiniLab, Walgreens withdrew from their partnership. It was later revealed that Theranos had voided 2 years of test results showing inaccuracies with the Edison technology. Corporate affairs. Location. Theranos was headquartered in Palo Alto, California. It previously had laboratories in Newark, California, and Scottsdale, Arizona. Management. From its incorporation in 2003 until 2018, Holmes was the company's chief executive officer. She recruited Channing Robertson, a chemical engineering professor at Stanford, to be a technical advisor and the company's first board member during its early years. Holmes's then-boyfriend Ramesh Balwani, a software engineer whom Holmes had met during high school, joined the company as its president and chief operating officer in 2009. In July 2011, Holmes was introduced to former U.S. Secretary of State George Shultz, who joined the Theranos board of directors that month. Over the next 3 years, Shultz helped to introduce almost all the outside directors on the All-Star board, which included William Perry, Henry Kissinger, Sam Nunn, Bill Frist, Gary Ruffeed, Jim Mattis, Richard Kovacevic, and Riley P. Bechtel. The board was criticized for consisting mainly of directors with diplomatic or military backgrounds. In April 2016, Theranos announced its medical advisory board, which included past presidents or board members of the American Association for Clinical Chemistry. Members were invited to review the company's proprietary technologies and advise on the integration into clinical practice. The board included members with relevant biomedical expertise such as past president of the American Association for Clinical Chemistry Susan A. Evans, William Fidge, former director of the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, David Helfett, director of the Orthopedic Trauma Service at the Hospital for Special Surgery, and Professors Anne M. Granowski, Larry J. Krikow, Jack Laydenson, Andy O. Miller and Stephen Spitalnik. Balwani left his position as president and coup in May 2016. At that time, the company announced its new board members, Fabrizio Bonanni, Richard Kovacevic, and William Fidge, who would help to publicly introduce its technologies. In May 2016, members of the Theranos board of directors were Elizabeth Holmes, founder and CEO; Riley Bechtel, former Bechtel Group CEO; David Boyes, a founder and the chairman of Boyes Schiller Flexner; William Fidge, former director of the CDC; Richard Kovacevic, former CEO and chairman of Wells Fargo; Jim Mattis, later U.S. Secretary of Defense; Fabrizio Bonanni, former executive vice president of Amgen. In December 2016, it was announced the Theranos management team would be restructured with the departure of Riley Bechtel. In January 2017, incoming U.S. Secretary of Defense nominee James Mattis resigned from the Theranos board. In January 2017, the Theranos board of directors included Elizabeth Holmes, William Fidge, Fabrizio Bonanni, Daniel Warman-Hoven, former NetApp CEO, replacing Riley Bechtel. It was also announced in November 2016 that the celebrity-studded board of counselors would be scrapped in January 2017. Valuation: Theranos raised millions of dollars in its first years. In 2004, Theranos was based in a rented basement near the Stanford campus. By December 2004, the company had raised more than $6 million from investors at a valuation of $30 million. The company had about $45 million total fundraising after Series B and Series C funding in 2006. Theranos raised an additional $45 million in 2010 at a valuation of $1 billion. The company moved to the former headquarters of Facebook in June 2012. The company had significant news coverage starting in September 2013 after profiles in the San Francisco Business Times and the Wall Street Journal. By 2014, Theranos had raised more than $400 million with an estimated value of $9 billion. In 2016, Forbes revised the estimated net worth of the company to $800 million, taking into account the $724 million of capital raised. In May 2017, participating shareholders provided a release of any potential claims against Theranos in exchange for shares of the company's new preferred stock. Holders of more than 99% of the shares elected to participate. Holmes contributed shares to the company and gave up equity to offset potential dilution to non-participating shareholders. In May 2018, John Carrero reported that American business and government leaders lost more than $600 million by privately investing in Theranos. Major investments had been made by the Walton family, Rupert Murdoch, Betsy DeVos, and the Cox family. The final liquidation of the company in September 2018 rendered these investments worthless.